Welcome back to Workshop 2 of the 2021 Civil Affairs Symposium hosted by the Civil Affairs Association. My name is John McElligott, and the facilitator for this second discussion, Workshop 2, focused on USACAPOC Command Strategic Initiatives and Civil Military Networking, is Colonel Straus Scantlin. He's Director of Strategic Initiatives for the U.S. Army Civil Affairs and Psychological Operations Command, Airborne. Colonel Scantlin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So welcome everybody, glad you could make it. And our big question is really a piece of what do we look like? What do we do in the future? With FM3 TAC 57 recently republished 28 July 2021, it's a different way of understanding our doctrine. We have brought doctrine forward from the past that still works, and we're combining it with new terms, tasks, and some new elements. Two of these new elements, the CA Task Force and Civil Network Development and Engagement, are going to become the focus of this panel. So how does a CA Task Force plan and implement civil network development and engagement during competition, conflict, or large-scale combat? From FM TAC 357, a CA Task Force is a scalable unit in charge of the stabilization elements and organized around the nucleus of CA and support elements, and provides an important linkage between interagency, interorganizational, and non-government organizations. The augmentation can include public affairs, maneuver elements, engineers, medical units, military police, logistics, transportation elements, or other units as necessary for stabilization operations. Civil network development and engagement is the activity that engages, evaluates, develops, and integrates civil network capabilities and resources into operations. It provides commanders with a more complete understanding of the operational environment. Civil network development and engagement enables freedom of movement and maneuver, management of limited resources, preservation of combat power, and options to find, disrupt, and defeat threats in the civil component. So based on that, we're now going to start a conversation on what we can do in the future. To lead the conversation, we have three brigade commanders, Colonels Keith Kelly, Reggie Kornegay, and Will Smith. Colonel Kelly enlisted in the United States Army Reserve August 1989 as a combat medic in the 100th of the 442nd Infantry Regiment in Honolulu, Hawaii. He commissioned in 1992 as an infantry officer in the 100th, and in the summer of 1999, he joined the 364 Civil Affairs Brigade. In 2004, he deployed to Afghanistan, served with the 10th Mountain Division, CJ9, the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit Special Operations Capable, and Terran Count PRT with the 3rd Brigade 25th Infantry Division Light. In February 2017, Colonel Kelly took command of the 152nd Theater Information Operations Group, and on April 1st, 2020, Colonel Kelly took command of the 364 Civil Affairs Brigades. His awards include the Bronze Star Medal and Combat Action Badge. In his civilian capacity, Colonel Kelly has 25 years of law enforcement service with the Honolulu Police Department, Portland Police Department, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Colonel Reggie Kornegay enlisted in the Army National Guard as an infantryman in 1989. He commissioned in 93 as a field artillery officer and then joined the 411th Civil Affairs Battalion in 1998. 2004, he deployed to Iraq with the 478th Civil Affairs Battalion Special Operations, and later to the Horn of Africa and Latin America and also the Caribbean. Colonel Kornegay recently took command of the 360th Civil Affairs Brigade. His awards include the Bronze Star Medal, Purple Heart Medal, Combat Action Badge, and the NATO CIOR Military Pentathlon Badge. In his civilian capacity, Colonel Kornegay is an entrepreneur and has owned several businesses in Florida. Colonel William Smith enlisted in the U.S. Army into the Ranger Regiment in 1990. After his active time, he commissioned in the U.S. Army Reserve in 2000 and transferred into civil affairs in 2002. Colonel Smith is deployed to Iraq and Kuwait. He commanded the 431st Civil Affairs Battalion, and 30 September 2021 took command of the 308th CA Brigade. His awards include the Legion of Merit, Bronze Star, and Combat Action Badge. In his civilian capacity, he is a Texarkana Fire Chief and Emergency Management Coordinator. The panelists will give their opening comments on this topic, and then they will take all questions from the attendees. These are, of course, not final ideas or comments on the topic. This is evolving. So please raise your hand or type a question in the chat. Colonel Kelly, will you begin?
Yeah, thank you. I really, first and foremost, thank you for allowing me in inviting me to participate. I'm both honored and humbled to be a part of this organization and participate today. First and foremost, from my perspective, the majority of my career has been focused in the Pacific AOR. So a lot of what I'm going to speak to is sort of from that perspective. And when I first looked at the FM, one of the things that struck me was the foreword that was published within the FM by Major General Roberson. And the 2 points were that really stuck out, and it kind of drive home the importance of this these two topics are the quote of trends in the future operational environment point to operations among populations in a complex multi-domain and extended battlefield. And then secondly, that CA soldiers shape the operational environment. And when I read that, it really drove home a series of comments and statements that I've heard over the years, going back to when I was a TIAD commander, when Major General Ammerman was so kind to select me for that position, and it was the realization of how we in the civil affairs community kind of possess the multitude of influence capabilities that the Army has. And what really strikes me about this civil network development and engagement is it's now putting together a framework in which to give us entry points into that, the human domain, which in my estimation is one of when we talk multi-domain operations, we don't necessarily recognize the human domain as its own domain, or even the cognitive domain as its own domain. And I think that's something that we need to you consider when our forces get good at something like this civil network development and engagement, along with integrating our civil knowledge integration. This sort of takes us to a whole new level of being a force in which during the competition phase, through crisis, through conflict, and the return to competition, that really does that piece that was mentioned in the foreword, which is shaping the operational environment. And a couple of concerns that I have with this as I read through it, and this is just from my perspective, is I think we have room to make this work and grow. But my first concern is, are we going to make network development a specific staff function or a specific team function, such as rely on a CLT or our Intel folks to manage the network development and engagement? And with the rapid evolvement of human networks and the changing human networks, I see we're going to need a continuous engagement to ensure that the information that we develop in this realm it remains relevant and remains useful. And then, how do we as CAPOC envision the retention and sharing of this information and any of the products that we develop, especially during the competition phase, as we help to shape that environment? I think those are the few takeaways that I had from the civil network development and engagement piece of the FM. Just a quick note on the Civil Affairs Task Force. Again, being a Pacific focused entity and having had a lot of experience and opportunities to work with US Indo-PACOM, I can tell you, the folks have been leaning so far forward in ensuring that the Civil Affairs Task Force concept is implemented in all the updates to O plans moving forward, to the point where they've actually reached down to the 351 and elements of 351 to help develop this, ensure the information is included into those O plans, and that it's done accordingly to what our capabilities can actually deliver for the GCC and the ASCC. So very critical piece that I think is going to become an important factor for brigade commanders moving forward as these get implemented into O plans. When that comes to execution, we're going to need to be really proficient in these tasks. So that's about all I have for opening comments. I'll turn it back over to you, Colonel Scantlin.
Thanks, Keith. Colonel Kornegay.
Okay, yes, hopefully everyone can hear me and I don't have too much connectivity issues. First, really appreciate everyone participating in this and also giving me the opportunity again, same as Keith mentioned, give an opportunity to talk about this, particularly change in doctrine. This is something that we've always talked about in the civil affairs community. When we look at the different changes that are now being applied here in the new FM 3-57, these are some things that we grumbled and fussed about during our deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, and even in certain other areas, potentially within other geographical combatant areas. And now we're seeing it start to come to a more defined pathway in what we thought civil affairs needed to go to, and what we also thought the engagement with the civilian population in times of conflict and crisis was supposed to look like. So it's exciting times, but it's also times in which we have some reservation about how we're going to make all of this happen. Because with the new doctrine here in 357, it's causing us now to look and shape and shift what we perceived civil engagement to be all the way back since early modern combat, right? To what we are now experiencing in this very much asymmetric multi-domain type of conflict and combat environment. So again, a lot of great information and a lot of great terminology is being used in this doctrine, but now we have to look at how we're going to implement this and how we're going to bring it to a manifested reality for the force. So a couple of things that I looked at in the doctrine that kind of brought some of what I just mentioned to the forefront. And as the one thing, it was situational awareness versus situational understanding. And I think anyone who's gone to Iraq and Afghanistan as a civil affairs operator, we knew that there was always an issue with truly getting situational understanding. We use situational awareness as a recognizing that something is there, right? You know, to give a simple analogy, we can be aware that a bull is in a China shop and tearing up China. And that's okay. We understand the bull's in there and we see the glass on the floor. So it's present and we can recognize and identify that. But we never really had situational understanding when we looked at how situations and civil dynamics was taking place in areas like Afghanistan and Iraq and different regions and tribal areas. We really didn't understand essentially why the bull was in the China shop, why it was hitting certain pieces of China and leaving other pieces of China alone, and then how we can persuade this bull in some form or fashion, whether it be kinetically or non-kinetically, to get out of the shop. And that's situational understanding, right? We have to figure out now with this new doctrine, how do we get the force to understand that there needs to be situational understanding when dealing with a civil dynamic, rather than just being aware that it exists. And to bring it a little bit more home, we looked at governance, total governance, in the areas in which we engaged in large-scale operations over the last 2 decades. We understood that these were Islamic governance areas within inside of the world, and that these governments and forms of government were uniquely different than ours. That's situational awareness. did we really have understanding of that element of the civil dynamic to a point where we could actually engage in it and do things like we're mentioning now in the doctrine of transitional military authority, having transitional governance develop within our presence on the ground? Or did we find ourselves, and most of us can agree, we found ourselves kind of floundering around, trying to figure out what Islamic governance meant to the population that we were now engaged with while we're in the middle of combat operations. So we're hoping that now, with this doctrine being more definitive in its language, that we'll start to really explore how civil affairs and how CMO collectively needs to address the population and its governance prior to us arriving, and how these things may have shifted and changed upon our arrival. And this is going to require, when we talk about CNDE, when we're talking about building civil networks, we now have to look at how do we get the civil networks in place that are before the need for, or before we engage in areas of crisis and armed conflict, as what we've seen in the last 2 decades, and how that relationship and that network can be enduring through that process. And that's one of the key points here, is the civil network that we develop is going to need to be enduring through all of the different elements and phases of conflict and throughout the competition continuum. And that's, I think that the doctrine is really starting to speak to this as far as in theory, but practice is where we're going to have to really delve into what we've been doing in our normal construct and how that needs to change. The doctrine talks about the best way to conduct civil network development is in person. And we know that the majority of civil affairs forces lie within the reserves. And under USARC, there is its own challenges of how do you get civil affairs personnel, how do you get civil affairs teams and operators into theaters during this competitive phase enough to truly develop a civil network. Because what we've done previously, we've gone in and we've tried to establish things in the midst of crisis and armed conflict. And if anyone knows anything about relationships and building networks, is that that's not something that you can do in the midst of necessity. It needs to be established and cultivated before the need to engage that network. Right? It's like sort of trying to build a computer network after you realize now that you need information to be flowing currently. Right? We need to build that network and decide what that network needs to be before the information flow really becomes extremely vital and important to us. So I think that where we're going with this, like I said, the language is there, and that's great. We need to start off with the language. The real challenge is going to be the implementation of this. How do we get our soldiers in place to truly build these realistic reality networks that are going to be necessary for us to engage the civil component throughout the continuum, and it be enduring for the force, so that we can meet our military objectives. We can also support transitional governance within a population that is not American, right? And be able to gain and develop and establish that trust, so that when we are brought into the situation where we're having to enter into the battle space, that we're not introducing ourselves to the civil component at that point. We're just now engaging with what we've already established. And I think where this is going to need to start is how we train our forces, and not just civil affairs forces, but also the maneuver element. Because previously, when we looked at training, when we looked at collective training, organizational training, we saw the focus being on the maneuver element. And with the new CA task force, we're saying that at times in this conflict, the maneuver element is not going to be the focal point. It's not going to be kinetic operations. It's going to be this non-kinetic engagement for which we are trying to establish transitional governance and to a manner in which the population is supportive of it, and it could lead into a permanent stability for which we can transition our forces out of theater. This needs to take place in our training products and our training paradigm, so that when we go to CTE rotations, there needs to be an element or a focus where we employ the CA task force into this, and it is not just an afterthought in this training model. Because what we've learned already from Iraq and Afghanistan is that we may win the kinetic fight, but that is not the end of conflict, right? You know, when the bullets stop firing, that is not victory, so to speak. It may just be a momentary pause between hostilities and the nature of the conflict, or it could be a transition and a transformation of conflict. We have to make sure that if we employ this new doctrine in this new construct, that the entire force is ready to engage in this, and this is going to have to start in training. It's going to have to start training. Now I'm going to stop there because I said I can go all day. This is a lot of great information that's inside of this new version of the FM, and I'm excited about it. And I definitely want to hear what the rest of the CA market has to say for it. So I'll pause there for you. I appreciate it, Marshall. Thanks.
Thanks, Reggie. Colonel Smith.
So it looks like I have one bar and the video may or may not work here.
We can hear you.
Okay. Okay, so you can hear me, but you can't see me. Okay, I apologize. I'm working off a tablet and I have one bar of connectivity. I'm at work today. Hey, again, I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Straus, thank you for letting me follow those two. That's gonna be a hard act to follow behind Keith and Reggie there. I think I'm very excited to see the doctrine that's come out, because what I'd like to talk about is I just came back from 16-month deployment with RCENT. And when I arrived there, we were falling in on a civil affairs support detachment, non-doctrinal. We had 2-man CLTs and kind of how they were doing business. It just wasn't doctrinal. And it was hard to convince people what we're doing and why we were doing it, why we're there. So, and then COVID hit. And we sat there, and that was a hard time. Hard to really show the value for civil affairs during that, because we couldn't meet with anybody, couldn't go out and do everything that we're just talking about. Earlier this year, we reorganized. We went and we got into the current doctrine, and we reorganized as a theater CMOC in our CLTs and where we're going. Wrote a new term of reference for RCENT and wrote an SOP. We did some exercises with the first TSC and RCENT and the RCENT forward element there, and kind of showed, you know, what we could do, the CMOC, and it was going well. And then Afghanistan happened. So it was kind of a weird situation there with the way that happened. So I was also filling in, I was the theater CMOC chief, I was also filling in as the deputy chief of staff forward for RCENT. And that kind of tied me down and hindered getting out and doing what I really needed to do. But I was able to work with the elements in Kuwait, and we set up in Buring, and two totally different experiences between Qatar and Kuwait. In Kuwait at Buring, they took a task force, the task force Spartan, and they put their 1-star in charge of it. The engineers were actually leading that, and then the CMOC supported there at Buring. And we had MP support. We had all the support MOSs there. It actually went very well in Kuwait. Ran 5,000 refugees through there for Operation Allies Refuge in 14 days. The humanitarian assistance that happened, it was just fantastic to see that work. And of course, there was some hiccups. There was a lot of interagency. They brought over customs and border protection, and we got those in there and worked through this. In contrast to what was going on in Qatar and down at AUAB. So initially, I went down there and we met with IOM. It was very difficult to get State Department and some of the interagency there. I think the main thing that was lacking was that task force and that C2 down there at Qatar and AUAB. So you saw in the headlines and what was going on. It was difficult. It's still difficult over there with the way that was run. It was very disorganized. Having that CA task force that we're looking at is crucial. I do think, though, that it needs to be at the KCOM level. I think having that 1 star for the credibility to interact, at least in my experience at RCENT, that's where it needs to be at. So I was standing there with Lieutenant General Farrell and initially on this, and he said he did not want the theater CMOC disengaging from what we were doing in other parts of the theater. He wanted a JIATF. Unfortunately, we never got to the JIATF. He rotated out shortly thereafter during the middle of Afghanistan, and Lieutenant General Clark came on. We did not get the JIATF set up, but the CA task force concept working in Kuwait was fantastic. And I think, though, without it being a 1 star level with a KCOM running that, it's going to be difficult to do that at any other level. So I'll leave it there and turn it back over to you, Straus.
Roger. Thanks, Bill. So for all the attendees, again, thank you for spending time here with the Civil Affairs Association and our panel. And we're going to open it up for some questions. We do not have anything in chat yet, but if you have a question and you want to unmute yourself, we can go ahead and start on those. If we don't have anything, I've got a couple of questions pre-typed up. I'd rather hear what you want to ask. So I'll pause for just a few seconds.
Hey, sir, this is Major Casserly.
Yes.
Can you hear me? From Honolulu. To pull the thread on Colonel Kornegay's discussion with training and with the implementation of, do you see an implementation of increased USACAPOC brigades and the inclusion of KCOMs in warfighting exercises with MCTP in order to get those reps and sets for integrating into the division in core B2C2WG enterprise and pushing that consolidation of gains and then transitional into military governance at those division and core level exercises? Over.
Yeah, so I'll take this one since it's at our level here at CAPOC. Yes, we are looking at that. When we look at our current CPXF exercises we do twice a year with our brigades, the PSYOP group, but I'm sorry, psychological operations battalions and our IO teams, we want to integrate those into something like the JWA, Joint Warfighter Assessment, or a warfighter, where that brigade or KCOM can, or the PSYOP battalion or PSYOP group can support that higher maneuver element, the higher headquarters, and perform these functions. So the answer is yes. I don't know when, and it's going to be an interesting time to work with all of the U.S. Army Futures Command and the different exercise groups, the Army Exercise Group and the Joint Exercise Group. Thank you. Okay, Tony's iPhone.
Hey, Straus, Tony Vaha. So as currently configured, a KCOM is designed to provide 2 CMOCs. You know, so one could be at a GCC echelon, one could be at ACC, whatever configuration it is. So building on Colonel Smith's point about the requirement being perhaps a KCOM vice a brigade, the $1 million question is, What structural changes is the proponent looking at to operationalize what they're describing in doctrine? Over.
So another great question. And I don't know. We'd have to, if we have someone from proponent on who would like to take that and come up with a good answer we can push out to the CA Association, would appreciate that. But I think it's related to this panel, but definitely outside my lane. So I'm going to write that down, Tony, and we'll try to get you an answer. Okay, anybody else?
Hey, Colonel Straus, this is Colonel Kelly again. If I can add a couple things to both of those questions from my perspective.
Yes.
So, as you know, of course, 364 is currently preparing for CPXF kicking off within a couple of months. And one of the, we just started our mission analysis process, and we're already looking to integrate whether there's opportunities within the current order in which to engage a civil affairs task force, because we do understand it's scalable, and does the scenario allow us to look at least having that conversation in regards to that, so we increase our understanding of what the CA task force really is. Additionally, we're looking into the developing the civil network engagement plan. We understand that the METs are not yet approved that are following the implementation of the new FM, but we're certainly looking into opportunities in which to gain a greater understanding of the new doctrine as we move forward in regards to the training. And to address the question that was asked about the structure, I think it was very interesting that this new FM doesn't necessarily lay down a structure, doesn't have the org charts like the old FMs have had in the past of what the teams look like. And I kind of wonder, in the same vein, is this giving proponent somewhat of a wide berth in which to relook at what our current structures are, and should they be changed to meet the intent of the new doctrine? And I know you and I have had many conversations in the past about the implementation of influencing capabilities across CAPOC, when in trying to decide if is there room to change what the UMRs say we should have in order to bring to bear under one command the different influencing capabilities in order to have those strategic effects out on the battlefield. So I just wanted to add that to that conversation, because I think those are both very great questions, and we definitely need to lean into that in both positions, structure and training. So thank you.
Thanks, Keith. And so we do have an expert on this one. We got Mr. Dennis Cahill, who is from the USACAPOC Force Management Office, who wants to address the Tony Vaja's question. Mr. Cahill?
Straus, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Please go.
Okay. Hey guys, first of all, I wanted to say, great opening comments from all three brigade commanders, and appreciate the endorsement for the rewrite of FM 3-57, as Colonel Sisk and Colonel Liddick before him, and also Lieutenant Colonel Dickerson have said, the 357 that was just published in July is a result of a lot of hard work by the Civil Affairs branch proponent and many participants from across the operational force in the force mod assessment that was done in 2019 and 2020. And the new core competencies that we described earlier are our way of better articulating to ourselves and to the Army and the Joint Force what exactly it is that we do, civil affairs forces do when deployed in civil affairs operations. As far as the CA task force is concerned, it's mentioned in the FM, and it's also, I haven't yet seen the draft of FM 3-0, But FM 3-0, my understanding is that it goes into some extensive discussion of how a civil affairs task force will support stabilization in rear areas, division rear areas, core rear areas, pretty much take on that role of leading and working through the initial governance, transition to governance in rear areas, as well as a long-term transition. And we and the proponent have written, still in draft, a draft civil affairs task force paper that we intend to work through some experiments in the coming year. And basically, the civil affairs task force is a term not just for brigade, not just for KCOM, but also it can be used for a battalion level or even as company level, depending on the mission, MET-TC. But one of the questions was, I think, Tony, you asked the question, what is the proponent doing for the structure? And Dr. Walsh was speaking earlier in an earlier session. Dr. Walsh, Dale Walsh, is our lead organizational design SME. And he's been leading some sessions. They're taking a lot longer than we had expected because, as Colonel Sis showed you earlier, there's very few of us. There's a lot of issues that we are trying to work between ourselves and the branch proponent coming out of the force mod assessment. But one of the working groups that Dr. Walsh is leading is on a forest design. And we've been working with the branch proponent and CAPOC and some others. And one of the things we have to correct in our force structure, and several of our past KCOM commanders have brought this up, how none of our formations are really organized well to conduct command and control over assigned and attached forces. And so that's one thing we've got to look at, putting the capabilities in our headquarters to better provide that task force headquarters structure to command and control all the capabilities that were mentioned, I think, by Colonel Scantlin earlier, that could come under a civil affairs task force structure. So there's a lot of work we've got ahead of us, and we believe we're working towards the solution. We will be, consulting with the operational force when we get to that point. But our force design update, I think, is due later on, or latter part of next year, and we hope to not this TAA, but the coming TAA. But anyway, I'll stop there. I know there's probably a lot of other questions.
Hey, Dennis, could I chime in real quick?
Dale, you're in. Good. Please go ahead.
I heard my name in vain, so maybe character me from my afternoon slumber. But two things. One, with regards to the Civil Affairs Task Force, what we are looking at doing is following the pattern that they've established at Corps and Theater Armies, and have an operational command post / contingency command post documented on the TOW and the MTOW, have a true separate paragraph and line number. So when we do form a civil affairs task force, that nucleus that the task force is built around does not have to steal or borrow personnel or equipment from the other staff directorates to form that thing. So say, for instance, a KCOM is tasked with forming a CATIF in whatever, country Y. The KCOM itself still has those daily operational requirements that they have to do to run the KCOM. But historically, we have taken personnel and equipment, and that restricts their ability to do their command and control functions for those units that are not in the operational or mission area. So that is the scheme of action that we're pursuing. And to get to your question, the intent is to submit the FDU, the suspensions, by June for TAA 2630 consideration. Over.
Thanks. Straus or Tony, does that support your question? Over.
I think it does. And I think also the comment is more to follow. We've got, sounds like till sometime beginning of next fiscal year to help with this. So I'm going to call on Carolyn Powell. I think she's got a question.
Hey, Straus, thank you. Actually, it follows up, and Dennis, you may be the person to jump back into this one, or any of the brigade commanders. But I'm just curious, so many of you that know me know I'm currently deployed to Germany to use EURAF G39, where they've consolidated CA, IO, SEMA, and Space STOW events all in the same, all the equities together. And the big piece that we noticed as we brought on the captain, the CKI team here, is trying to understand how to do that secondary level education for our field grade officers and our senior NCOs to prepare them for strategic level planning at something like an ACC level. And so I'm just curious if the proponent or even the brigades have thought about how we can prepare our soldiers. We do a great job at the tactical, the CAT level, but how do we bring them up to prepare them to go into an ACC or some higher level strategic planning? Over.
Hey, Reggie, do you want to take this one?
Yes, I'll take a little bit of that. Hey, Carolyn, how's everything going? You know, that's a great question. And I think that we already start to do some of that. Obviously, we're sending caps to the ASCCs and even to do work in the CENTCOM so that we can build that connective tissue in the strategic planning process. The key point here is that they have to be utilized to the best of their abilities and also to what their capabilities are. And this is where this training and education needs to come about. And you could probably echo this as well throughout your experiences, is that depending on the leadership at the time, who's in command, and the staff, both at the ASCCs or at the GCC level, determines what type of utilization takes place when we have our teams there. Those who have employed the teams have seen great benefit, and they return with requests to have those FTNs refilled and even expanded. And then there are those circumstances under certain command teams where there is struggles and challenges taking place with those teams at the strategic level, and they get underutilized or misutilized, and they don't get the benefit on both sides, both on the CA soldiers who are there not only just to perform real world tasks, but also to develop their capabilities and their competencies, but also for the ASCCs and the GCC to understand, and their staff to understand how they can leverage those CA planners and those liaison teams to better engage in what we're going to see here now, and that is the civil network development. We're going to have to get out in the field much more in order to establish the CND and the CNDE, and that's going to really bring out the question of resourcing. How do we get our soldiers and operators into theater, into the command structures that before conflict, before we're dealing with crisis, to really start to build those networks. And we know that there's funding issues involved in that. There's just the normal challenges dealing with Compo 3. But we're going to have to figure out how that's going to take place in order for us to really benefit from these changes that are in EFF. And I hope that answers at least some of your questions related to that.
Caroline, Dennis Cahill here. You probably noticed earlier in the early session that Colonel Sisk and I are in the same office, so he had to work on another task, but I brought him over here to go ahead and respond to your question. So Colonel Sisk.
Okay, so again, there's a couple initiatives that are out there. A few we spoke about earlier today in terms of, one, the recoding of TWI positions, right? So the reconfiguring how TWI is being done. Before they were very narrowly focused. Now it's going to broaden it out and get after more of the experiences and skills that our folks need within the environment. So that's one piece. Coding positions to be for education, right? So that opens it up to the resources when that becomes applicable. So that's another avenue within the CASTLE program. That's going to be cradle to grave. It's not going to be like before where, hey, whatever time you spend at 3rd Battalion going through the course, it's not one course is going to set you up for the rest of your life, right? There's going to be training and certifications beyond that piece. We're exploring those through, sorry, I didn't mean to touch your knee there, Dennis, but we're looking at exploring some of those through various universities. Matter of fact, myself and Dr. Walsh will be heading over to William and Mary later this week to kind of just flesh some of that stuff out and see if that's a possible venue. Because you're right. I mean, for so long, I look at it, I come up from this particularly from an active duty lens. We get one course. That's it as far as education goes. And that's supposed to set us up from team leader to however high we can get, and then you sink or swim. Well, that's not the right answer. It's not the right answer for the active component. It's not the right answer for the reserve component. You can't say, well, the reserves bring skill sets from the civilian, therefore that's not enough either. Okay, there has to be a medium in there that we're getting on the active side, we're getting the skills that we require to be successful in the higher levels, higher echelons, both to interact and plan and advise commanders at that level, and the reserves the same thing. And how we go about that is going to be very, very important as we move forward, which is why we're looking at, like I said, so many avenues of potential success in that. Over.
Hey, Dennis, this is Colonel Kornegay, Dennis Reginald. What a key point, Dennis, that you're bringing up is that level of education, the advanced education that's necessary for our soldiers and operators to do what we're going to be asking them to do here under this new FM. Having the basic levels of CA training is great, obviously, for the tactical level. But when we're talking about having these levels of implications, we've seen that even with our civilian experiences and competencies, that's not enough for us to send soldiers into those situations where there is strategic level planning taking place at the civilian level, at the cultural level, where there's not enough of an academic curriculum to support that. So we do literally throw them out there and say sink or swim. And some do great at it because they may have some experiences with their civilian backgrounds, but others who do not have the benefits and the blessings of having those experiences outside of the uniform, they find themselves in uniquely challenging situations. And this is where you get different types of results when given the same circumstances with different role players in place. So I absolutely agree that there needs to be a continuum of education and academic development for what we do here in CA as it relates to, like I said, the civil network developments, as it relates to developing and implementing the transitional government, and the cultural elements of governments needs to also be in play.
Awesome. Thanks, Reggie. Thanks, Colonel Sisk. So I want to move to, and I'm going to pre-apologize for the name, but from the GBR, Odedra Visalji. If you can please unmute.
So I just want to say the question is, when discussing the future proofing of CA force development, what potential hurdles do you look to face? And expanding upon that just slightly is future proofing in the sense that further potential iterative development to be highly adaptive in the changing future operational environment.
Okay, hey, William, Colonel Smith, you want to try a stab? Because you talked about some other iterations of the CA task force.
Hey, Straus, can you repeat the question? It was broken for me.
Absolutely. So the question is, when discussing the future proofing of CA force development, what potential hurdles do you look to face in the future operational environment? And that is in the sense of future potential iterative development to be highly adaptive to that future operational environment, because it's a future proofing for beyond the near horizon. It's for being able to future proof for far horizon, 2050 and beyond. Over.
Okay. So have you heard of vector-based analysis? So I was just recently, a couple of days ago, hit up with that, and I think it's looking at doing things differently, how we continue to develop as the situation changes. Like, as we move our forces into the strategic level, which I think across the board we don't have much experience on the reserve side doing that, and so looking at things like the vector-based analysis. And implementing that and working on that will increase our worth as we go forward and provide what those commanders are looking for. A lot of times, I don't think we provide that. And I think with the task force and everything that we're doing, if we don't get this into their doctrine, what we're trying to do, if they're not putting it into their doctrine so that from the top down, they accept that and are expecting us to do that, we're not going to make those advances that we need to make. That kind of answer?
Definitely does. Thank you, William.
Well, also, I'll chime in a little bit for you. Now, is Visalji first or last name?
So Vishalji is my first name, but everyone just calls me Vish. It's easier for everyone involved. So thank you for the perfect pronunciation of it.
Well, thank you. So that is one of the things I do here at USACAPOC is the strategic initiatives. What are we going to look like in 2035? So one thing we're doing now is how do we use what we have now, the capabilities, the capacity, use it differently. Of course, our proponent and UFMC with the new doctrine update has thrown us a curveball because now we have to go back and relook at all of our plans. But this next year, we're going to put together a team to test a concept of a tailored organization that includes all of our information related capabilities we have, to include military intelligence as a support, public affairs, information operations, psychological operations, civil affairs, geospatial engineering assets, and how do we look at the operational environment and provide an answer to the commander. That will help us drive to exactly what William said. We've got to give feedback to our proponent, to the big brains in our organization who can spend the time to look at what do we have to do, how do we do it, and who is going to do it. And with the way we're tailoring our support elements, our packages, that gives us that flexibility that if a similar problem comes up in 3 years, we have an answer that worked, but we may need to change it. And that goes back to that CA task force. There's not really a structure defined. It can be tailored for what we need to do. We just have to be able to manage it, to run it, and to exploit all of the capacity and capability it brings with it.
Thank you so much. That's an absolutely amazing response. And thank you so much for going into so much detail with that. Over.
Yeah, thank you for attending. Keith?
Straus, I have a little bit to add to that. So I think we're in a unique position as brigade commanders, trying to manage our finite resources and answer to the mission sets that are presented to us. And, of course, we're limited by funding and available days for our reserve forces and managing that against schooling, et cetera. And I think one of I believe every GCC provides us a proving ground, if you will, in which we could put these concepts to test and report back if we had the ability. But I think like what Reggie said is, how do we get into these situations that will allow us to be in a theater during the competition phase, to do real world application of our civil affairs task and provide information back that can be looked at to determine whether or not those are viable applications in that world. And I think the additional challenge is, as we're looking to get to the multi-domain capable force that is in our strategic plan by the year 2028, where's the room for innovation? Where's the room for testing and failing so that we can learn and put forth ideas that can be implemented down the road? And I got to tell you, from the perspective of a battalion, or a brigade commander, and looking at my battalions and the companies and everything that's on the calendar, there is very little room for us right now to find where we could put these in, and then add to it, the question about how do we develop our soldiers for that strategic mindset. I think that we have a lot of activities that we're trying to really put on our forces, and so it's a great series of questions. And in a perfect world, we could do all this stuff, but especially as the Compo 3 forces, it's a very difficult game of balancing what's important enough to focus on at the moment. And I appreciate all the comments. I've been reading the chat room, and I think we're there's a lot of challenges ahead of us, and that's the leadership challenge that we are facing right now as brigade commanders. And hopefully at the end of our command tenures, we've at least put our units in a position to continue to take it towards that next level. So I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Keith. Hey, Tony, got your hand up? Tony Vaha?
Yeah, I apologize. Took me a minute to get off mute. So I heard Carolyn's point on like prepping, our capabilities for that theater strategic echelon, which we're routinely doing at 353, based on some of the FTNs we have. And I appreciate Kurt's answer on some of the like hard coding billets and also training with industry, which doesn't necessarily help the Army Reserve and Compo 3 as much. But just a question for, I guess, if the proponent guys are on here. So a lot of times we try to look external to solve our solutions, which require resourcing that we may not have at our disposal, and resourcing that seems to be getting tighter and tighter, given the Department of Defense's current initiatives, both in spaces as well as in hard dollars. So one thing that could assist KCOMs and brigades is the development of gaming and gaming type capabilities, gaming and simulation type capabilities that would allow us to look at these problem sets over a time continuum, like say a week-long exercise, because then we could devote our own resources to it. If those types of things were developed where we could actually throw people into those types of scenarios and broaden their education and their training, because the Army's self-development model is not just schoolhouse education. It's also operational experience, and it's self-development, personal self-development. So I'm just curious if there's anything out there that they're looking at in the future that would give us the capability for gaming and simulation as technology continues to improve in that front. And that's my question. Over.
Colonel Scantlin, unmute, sir.
Thank you. Someone had to do it at least once. Hey, Tony, so on your specific question, what are you asking about or advocating for? That's the internal possibility?
So things that we could do on our own, whether it be gaming simulation, there's a lot of, even the War College has invested a lot in this, in the development of strategic leaders, right? Different gamings and simulations to develop those strategic competencies, vice, asking for an external resource all the time, which sometimes is hard to fight for. You know, perhaps there are some partnerships that could be developed with those entities in the Army that are doing that, so that we could have something that would be a week-long exercise, and we throw our colonels, lieutenant colonels, senior battle staff NCOs into, just to get them thinking in that strategic mindset. Over.
Okay, yeah, now I've got it. Mr. Cahill, I think has an answer.
Colonel Sisk is coming back. Here we go.
Hey, Tony. Yeah, so that actually is a great question. And I'd love to say that, you know, I was all over that, but I'll be honest with you, you know, I'm technically declined. So I need a lot of help in that area. And so it's kind of a blind spot for me, but that is definitely something we can kind of look to tap into. And that would be since we've got Dylan Montgomery on board, those are the specific things and ideas that we're looking for to kind of guide him as he's looking through the S&T world and what could be applicable and how can we utilize it to better our forces.
And Tony, John McGilligan just sent on the chat, attend the panel on Wednesday, focused on new gaming technologies to train in the human domain. So we're definitely going to be sitting in on that one as well. Over.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, excellent. Okay, so Mr. Cahill stole my thunder on the panel Wednesday, and I'm looking through chat to catch up on questions. Okay, so it looks like we've got a pause on questions. I've got a good one, and this is for all of the panel, and it relates to the both civil networks and the Civil Affairs Task Force. How would disruption of civil networks caused by conflict impact the Civil Affairs Task Force operations and their engagement strategy? So I'm going to kick that one to Reggie first. Colonel Kornegay.
Okay, that's a great question. Again, Marshall, thanks. You know, this is the great thing about this is we're now really looking into the civil dynamic truly for what it is. It is a very very asymmetric, very abstract, and highly evolving entity of the human construct, right? We're talking about civil governance. We're talking about a population. And, you know, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about the concept of the social contract theory, right? With Hobbes and Locke and Socrates. I know you're probably thinking that I need to cut more grass or do something else better with my time. But the reality is that we are talking about going into an environment, and we've done this for years, but we just never really understood the dynamic of this. You're going into a population which already has an established social contract with the government. And that government, as even the doctrine says, well, we may have to go into transitional military authorities, is when that government fails or that current government is disposed of by our military operation, that the social contract is broken. So we may come in there with a different understanding of what that government structure was and what that contract meant to the population at that time, watch it deteriorate or dissolve, and then try to formulate in the midst of a transitional military government, or that's run by the military, a new contract. So it is going to be extremely challenging for us to really truly do this to any success. I think all of us can argue that in both examples with Iraq and Afghanistan, there were successes on smaller scales, but globally we saw that the governments that we were trying to put in place that we thought were going to be more enduring wind up not being enduring at all. And was that an issue of execution or just the theory of what we thought governance and success of governance was going to mean for that particular population? So I think when we look at training, we need to look at a term I'm using now, operational dexterity, right? Where we have to be able to quickly shift our expertise and how we apply our competencies as CA operators into a given circumstance that is changing dynamically when we're engaging in that particular theater or that particular operation. If we get locked into thinking that there is a clear-cut solution to everything that we come into in the realm of transitional governance, in the realm of developing social or networks or cultural networks, we're going to find ourselves in the same circumstance, believing that we've won the fight and we've sealed the peace, walk away and watch it all crumble. Right. So I absolutely think that this is going to take us really looking at developing soldiers in a much different way, developing CA soldiers and CA teams and units in a much different way. Does it mean that we have to become even more regionally aligned than we currently are? Right. That's a question that may need to come about, especially in Compo 3, because we don't have time to be the be all and do all of everything when it comes to civilian aspects and elements on the battlefield in every theater, which we've tried to do. And again, we've seen some successes, and then we've seen some areas where clearly we were the round peg in the square hole as far as how we were going to engage that population. But I think we do need to look at focusing our training, which is already limited in itself by time and resource, to where we can engage this new doctrine into practice, where it's actually going to be fruitful and yield what the intent of this change is supposed to be. Hopefully I didn't lose you. I saw some connectivity issues.
Hey, thanks, Reggie. I heard all of that. I hope the audience did too. Bill Smith, do you want to add anything?
So that was fantastic, Colonel Kornegay. I mean, I absolutely agree with everything you said. One thing that I was thinking about where you're saying that is, man, every time we deploy, it's like we start over again. Every time teams change out, and you know, maybe not every time, but it's just that the continuity, and we have to get better at CNDE. We have to get better at passing this on and not starting over. And we need to push it down from the strategic level down to these teams, so they're following the same LOEs and not developing their own, you know, course of action that they want to do, something that's near and dear to them. Because the Compo 3 guy comes in, he's a firefighter and he wants to work with fire departments or concentrate on that. We've got to focus on the country plans and make sure that it's tied in with the LOEs and what we're doing, and that that we're not starting over each time. That's what I was thinking about while he was saying that. That's all I have, Straus.
Roger, thank you. Keith Kelly, you want to add anything?
Absolutely. So no, I think to build on both of those, kind of ties back into one of the comments I made during my initial statement was, the human networks evolve so rapidly, and there's a number of factors that will drive the network, whether it's a friendly leaning, a neutral, or an adversarial leaning network based on whatever's happening. And you talk specifically about disruptions of these networks due to conflict. And I think what that kind of goes into what I was suggesting is, how do we as a whole have this continuous engagement so we have the understanding over time, which leads right to that topic of continuity. Right, it's the data that we gather in this network development is only as good as the data at the time we gathered it and what we do with it. If we don't share it, if we don't maintain it, if we don't maintain contact, it's useless information. But if we have this information and we're continually building it, when the disruption happens, we should be able to effectively evaluate whether or not these networks and their allegiance shifts at all, because again, these networks should act as a force multiplier for our commanders on the ground in order to achieve effects on the battlefield. And if a network that was neutral becomes an adversarial leaning network by the time there's a conflict. Our avenues for targeting them with for influencing may be different now because of that dynamic. And I think it's one of these that we need to be really engaged over time if we're going to make civil network development worth anything. And again, going back to that continuum of competition, it goes right back to what Reggie said at the beginning, is how do we get in during the competition phase, and then how do we remain in throughout the entirety of that conflict? Because then our networks and the network information that we develop will be actually worth something to those commanders, depending on, no matter what time they enter into that theater. So I'll pause there.
Thank you.
If I can add on more to that, and again, great points, Heath, on this is, if we don't get into the fight during competition, by the time we get to the point of open conflict, the war is already lost. And we're already seeing this in the information age and misinformation age. And this is principally because we're using old paradigms of managing and winning conflict, when the world is fighting in different ways now. They're fighting in more economic ways, which means that the small guy with the smallest purse can still win the fight if he uses that purse in a manner which hobbles or disables the capabilities of the larger force, right? I have a funny analogy. I'd say back when Mike Tyson was in his heyday, right? He's the most brutal champion that we ever seen. Most people did not want to get into the ring and fight Mike Tyson in his prime of his career, because you knew that was a losing battle, right? So the best way to even engage with Mike Tyson is, yeah, you can talk a whole bunch of things out into the press and everything like this, just don't get in the ring, right? He even said it himself, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? But the reality is no one wants to get into the ring with the US as far as force on force, kinetic fighting, right? They know that's highly probable a losing fight. So the best thing to do is to poke at you and outside the ring and discredit you as a fighter, discredit you as a champion without ever stepping into the ring. And this is where this fight is taking place for us right now in the age of information, that the enemy is beating us not on the battlefield, so to speak, or not in the traditional battlefield, but they're beating us in the battlefield of the mind and psyche of social elements and societies of not wanting to work and deal with the US on matters that are not related to military conflict. And this puts us at a greater risk when we can't find allies for which we can trust, or that can have full trust and confidence with us, if based off of how the enemy is now engaging in warfare and conflict. And I think that CA has a great role to play in this if we can get CA into theater, in engagements, building these civil networks in a more enduring fashion, a more in-depth and robust way, where we can combat these things before it gets to open conflict.
Thank you. Okay, so any more questions? I know there's a really vigorous debate going on in chat, talking about developing the training audience or training scenario for warfighters and joint level exercises. Comment on the Marine Littoral Regiment formation. Does anybody want to ask or comment about those?
Sir, it's Aaron from the Marine Corps. What's the question coming with the MLRs?
So it's not a question per se, but it says the comment is we need to do what the Marine Corps is doing with their new Marine Littoral Regiment formation, which is a persistent forward presence. Task Force Oceana, which is in the Pacific, demonstrates a basic example of this with Compo 3 in Civil Affairs Forces. So if you could educate us, what is the Marine Littoral Regiment look like and what is it doing?
That's right. So the Marine Corps is, constantly trying to evolve for the future fight. We went through that when Commandant General Neller went the 2025 rebuild and all that. Then we now have current Commandant General Berger, who is, looking now at the 2030 force and things like we've gotten rid of tanks. And all of our law enforcement battalions are also offline, so no more MPs, which hurts me on a visceral level. So that was my first MOS. So, it was an interesting kind of thing to see what we're going to go from there. With that, we looked at a persistent engagement force. What that means is, a small, agile group of individuals who you can send off to live in various island, based countries for short periods of time, or extended periods of time, depending on the mission requirements. Almost looking back to when the Marine Corps made a lot of name for itself in the Philippines and those kind of operations, long-term kind of engagements, but also thinking about the reduction of signature management or the, putting out any signatures, physical signatures included, rotating those individuals from one location to another to try to stay ahead of the, adversary, the physical elements of the adversary, not anything else. The structure of it is really, it's got a couple different groups to it. I don't know what is releasable at the time, just because they're still kind of going through some of the smaller minutia changes. But there is, a littoral combat team with infantry and heavy recon elements, a logistical unit, an air unit, standard Marine Corps MAGTF kind of structure. But also we have a nice size PSYOP element, like I talked about earlier, the civil affairs team that's there, and the introduction of the network engagement and network analysis aspects that are really just for that unit, but we're hoping to ripple across the community. So being able to plan and direct network engagements, not only from the ones and zeros on the cyberspace realm, but also those key leader engagements or those local leaders that need to be engaged by our CA teams, our Comstrat elements. And while we've been talking about how these teams are going to integrate, there has been a big element of now having the right people in the room. And by that, I mean like CI Humit and CA are sitting down and having conversations about, okay, I'm going to go do this engagement. What do we need to know? Or we did this engagement and here's what we learned. Not from I'm going to come out of that, or my teams are going to come out of it with a list of questions, that the intel individuals want. So we can still stay away from being a intel source, but just so we're sharing and having conversations about it so that they can, share that with their elements. Also, the CA teams or the CA factors about how we need to integrate with our partners, our interagency partners, which some of the other elements of the MLR don't think about. We are going to said country. Who's the State Department rep that's there? Are we using any messaging or planned engagements that they've approved or that they already have in place? How do we deconflict with any kind of messaging that they already have also set up in place? All of that's happening now with these units. There's going to be 3 of them, 2 active standing flag MLRs, and then a 3rd one that's going to be a little bit of rotation right now. So various units will come in and supplement that, almost like a reserve kind of structure. But there's been discussion about that's might not work. So now let's leave all three of those as standard units and still kind of being fully formed and fully developed. Hope that answers some of the questions. Oh, and they are purely Pacific, you know, MAR4 pack looking elements. So one last thing, there is some conversation of integrating those elements with 6th Fleet, so we can create that you know, larger naval force. We haven't gotten to the point of discussing, or maybe there have, I just haven't been in part of those discussions of how they're going to incorporate the naval force in with, you know, the Task Force Oceana or any of the larger COCOM level elements. Over.
Awesome, thank you. I know 3rd MEF needs the help, or 3 MEF, sorry, got to say it the right way. Thanks, Anthony. So last comment is going to be from Mr. Cahill, and then we're going to wrap it up so we can have a break before workshop number 3. So Mr. Cahill, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Straus. I was just going to say, I wouldn't characterize what was going on in chat between Colonel Pogge and me a debate or anything. We were just, you know, I made the comment that, you know, I think it would be helpful for all of us if commanders going through combat training centers, warfighting exercises, and Colonel Pogge mentioned that the ACC level, ASCC level exercises, if we put in working as a Civil Affairs Task Force as a training objective, that would force the exercise folks to build it into the scenario, and we could help support that. Brian Kaiser has been doing that for us in the experimentation piece within Trade Economic Futures Command. But as I said in the notes, we don't have the bandwidth to hit all training centers or warfighters or theaters. And Colonel Pogge recommended that maybe the CA commands could free up a few folks to work on that with their theater level exercises. So just wanted to throw that out there. Over.
So Mr. Cahill, I know you don't mean this, but I'm going to tell you, I heard that you're providing the money for those people. I know you didn't. You did not. Yeah. So I'm going to go and do a quick wrap up. Basically, we have talked about the Civil Affairs Task Force, Civil Network Engagement and Development, the new FM3 TAC 57. We've talked about exercises, and I think there's a general consensus that no matter how we implement or execute the new doctrine, these 2 new topics, we got to practice. We need to go out to the appropriate level of echelon of exercise, whether that's CTC, Warfighter, CPXF, JWA, or one of the combatant command exercises, but we've got to practice, and it's got to be meaningful and provide value to that supported commander. We've talked about preparing our mid and senior level personnel with basically continuing education. One class, one course does not fit you for your entire career, from team participation all the way up to brigade, KCOM, theater level involvement. We've talked about a little bit of during conflict, how does a disrupted civil network, how does it impact our operations? Some of our Marine brethren, what are they doing with their Marine littoral regiments? And so I think it's a pretty productive discussion. We're going to type these notes up and get them back to the Civil Affairs Association. And I just want to say, on behalf of USACAPOC, our brigade commanders, thank you very much to everybody who has taken their valuable time out of their schedule to participate with us and to listen and to ask questions. If you didn't have time to ask a question or you think of one later, please reach out to me and to the CA Association, and we will see what we can do to get that answered from our panel or anybody else, and at least incorporate your good ideas into the future of what we look like and what we do. Thank you. John, over to you.
Colonel Scantlin, thank you so much. Thank you to our speakers today. Folks, as I posted in the chat, please take a break and return to this same Zoom meeting room by 1500 Eastern for workshop 3, which will be the final workshop of the day. And that is entitled Non-Commissioned Officer Forum, the Role of the CA, NCO in Building Networks. So we're going to stop the recording for this session. Please come back by 1500 Eastern. Thank you.